Welcome to the Chaos Sector. We return to the Matrix. Now, we know our audience is not affected by the magic pixie dust, but, it's still insulting for the mainstream media to even attempt to do it. Unfortunately, it does work on many out there in the political matrix. Their brains are being tossed around at such a rapid speed, the synapses are completely out of control. This affects their ability to process information accurately. And of course, that information can then be altered in the process of collecting it. In other words, brainwashing. Some have assumed we are Republicans or lean to the right. Well, that's inaccurate. We're outside of the political matrix. That's what we're exposing right now. But I get it. The criticism of Democrats makes it appear we're on the right. Here's the thing. We advocate for detaching yourself from politics until elected officials, mayors, governors, senators, presidents, vice presidents, the entire government body for that matter, show that they are working for the citizens of that country. The more you feed that system, the more power they hold, the more you have individuals disingenuously becoming politicians due to that very power and money. The other dynamic that makes some think we're on the right is our analysis of Trump compared to Democrats. Trump is driven by ego. He has done some good for the country, but it's rooted in narcissism. There's a good quality underneath the madness. We can say that about most politicians. Although Democrats expose this narcissism, they themselves don't offer any benefits with their own narcissism. Democrats stand for far worse ideologies and policies than their political counterparts. And see, we care about what affects society more. So they put themselves in that hot seat, which we will definitely call them out for. Hope that cleared up any misunderstandings. Now, I guess we'll talk about Democrats once again, due to another episode of Magic Pixie Dusting. Kamala Harris has recently proposed in her rallies she will be tough on crime and tough on the border. This is officially the Twilight Zone, where there's that one person who knows the town is being invaded by monsters and everyone else is acting like nothing is wrong. This is the problem. How in the world can Harris propose to be tough on crime when she, along with old Joe, just let cities burn down in favor of wokeism? She advocated for bailing out criminals, rioters, and looters. She supported the, quote, Freedom Fund bill that released alleged violent offenders from murders to rapists. Now, this was during the George Floyd protest, which turned into riots, arson, and mass looting across the country. But the issue with that Freedom Fund is there were some very dangerous individuals released back into society. The New York Post, which is tolerable at least, had an article regarding this Harris support for that bill. Quote, Kamala Harris's support for bail fund that freed violent criminals shows how tough on crime she really is, unquote. Now, this is referring to the Freedom Fund bill that Harris supported, which released many criminals back into society. Now, of course, it was centered around the George Floyd protest, but we all know that ended up being complete mayhem with rioting, arson, and looting across the country. Here's a screenshot of Harris's tweet, which is apparently still up on her account. Quote, if you're able to, chip in now to the Minnesota Freedom Fund to help post bail for those protesting on the ground in Minnesota, unquote. Now, those protesters were not merely protesting. They were rioting, looting, burning down buildings, and even threatening innocent residents during that time of chaos. And they were arrested for it. And Harris, instead of choosing to take a neutral approach of supporting the constitutional right to protest, but also supporting the rule of law if those protesters turn into rioters and looters, well, she chose to ignore the rule of law and full-fledged push for releasing criminals. They were criminals, simple as that. If you burn down an auto zone, which had nothing to do with the death of George Floyd, if you're throwing rocks at civilians driving by trying to get home, these are examples of criminal activity. It is not peacefully protesting. And then there's more. In regards to this Freedom Fund bill that was passed, the Freedom Fund bill raised about $40 million in cash after Harris showed support for that organization. It was already morally compromised prior, as it was a bill passed to bail out individuals from pretrial jailing and immigration detention. Yeah, it makes all the sense in the world now, right? Also, it was formed in 2016. What are the chances it was formed when Trump gets into office and was tough on illegal immigration? But the funding increased dramatically with Harris's endorsement, which of course is taxpayer money, which this cash was used to release accused murderers rapists, and other criminals. In a nutshell, the majority of that money raised, the so-called peaceful protesters, made up a tiny fraction of it. So we know that the majority of that money was used to release other criminals, really dangerous criminals, by the way. Quote, Darnica Floyd got out on $100,000 after being accused of stabbing a man who refused to have sex with her. In 2021, she was convicted and sent to prison. Christopher Boswell, a convicted rapist, was facing 10 felony counts, including attempted rape, sexual assault, and kidnapping against 2 women, when he got released on $350,000 bail. Those charges were later dropped, but he was convicted last year for heinous felonies committed in 2022. Bailed out in August 2021 on a domestic abuse charge, George Howard, weeks later, murdered Luis Martinez Ortiz in a road rage incident. He pleaded guilty last year. Minnesota Freedom Fund bailed out Lionel Timms on charges of violently pummeling a bus rider who refused to give him money. A month later, he was arrested for leaving his victim with a traumatic brain injury. In 2021, he was convicted and sentenced to 5 years in prison for felony assault. Unquote. Now, some may say, well, Harris didn't think these people would be freed through the Freedom Fund bill. Fair enough at face value. Harris obviously looked into the organization and their agenda, and she knew that many of those criminals that were bailed out were not, quote, peaceful protesters. Harris knew that there were very dangerous criminals being bailed out by the Freedom Fund organization, and instead of staying away from that organization for her political integrity, she chose to embrace it, endorse its agenda, and even helped raise even more money, taxpayer money, to release violent criminals back into society, which led to the aforementioned crimes. So with such a firm stance and statement politically, Harris will not be tough on crime. She will provoke it, endorse it, and then attempt to blame the violence on the political opposition. Then we have Harris pledging to be tough on the border. Someone is either so obsessed with power where they think they can say whatever and the people will believe it, or there have to be drugs involved here. You are currently the border czar. What policy can Harris point to that she proposed and enforced that helped crack down on illegal immigration? Speaking of cracking down, I hope Harris isn't buddying up with Hunter Biden. Because of the cracking down, she's cracking under pressure. There's crack somewhere in this equation. Sorry, but something is absolutely off with this person.
Yeah, I don't think she's doing crack with Hunter, but definitely cracks in the foundation of Harris's character. Clearly, there's some mental impairment. Marijuana or simply too much of that red wine. In my opinion, they're all on something, to be honest. But the left-wing media tried to execute damage control by claiming Harris wasn't the border czar. Oh, old Joe gave her the task of dealing with Central and South America to get to the root of the problems. Okay, well, in this administration, if Harris wasn't the border czar, then who the hell was it then? I'll wait for a moment. We know who was the previous border czar, Roberta Jacobson. Now, Jacobson resigned April 9th of 2021. But before she resigned, old Joe had announced in March that Harris would be responsible for addressing the southwest border surge. We all remember what he stated, right? Quote, I can think of nobody who's better qualified to do this than the former California Attorney General. Unquote. You can't think of anyone more qualified, old Joe? How about your first border czar in Roberta Jacobson? Something tells me that Jacobson had either realized that the administration was not going to be tough on illegal immigration and decided to haul ass out of there before she was held accountable for it, which is more likely, or she found out that old Joe was preparing to replace her anyway, so she resigned before he had that chance to fire her. I mean, look at this facial expression on Jacobson's face. It's like, I'm getting the hell out of here. These people are maniacs. Nevertheless, if Jacobson resigned, who was this administration's border czar? And you have Harris, quote, be responsible for addressing the southwest border surge. What exactly is that title given to Harris, if not fucking border czar? See, the reason they didn't title it border czar is because it obviously magnifies that Harris as border czar did absolutely nothing to stop that surge of immigrants, legal and illegal. So they create this hybrid role, which only calls into question, well, if she's not the border czar and the former border czar resigned, does this administration not have a border czar? No wonder millions of illegal immigrants are flooding the country. They don't have a border czar. Oh, well, let's leave the door wide open. what's the worst that could happen, right? It's a double-edged sword, a constant problem Democrats face. Nothing new there. Yet now, Harris, as a presidential candidate, vows to be tough on the border. What did she do in regards to immigration? Well, the administration sent approximately $4 billion of taxpayers' money, by the way, to Central and South America to help solve the, quote, root causes of migration. Old Joe, you've been in politics your entire adult life. Surely you know the root causes of migration, right? You were just in the Obama administration as vice president, which deported millions of immigrants over the course of his 8-year stint. It's not about money in those countries. For instance, Mexico specifically is ranked in the top 15 in global economies. So it's not about the money, it's about crime and those governments that allow criminals to control the country. Seems it's starting to rear its ugly head in the United States. And see, that's just more frustration as you pretend to get to the root causes of migration by sending money to those countries when this has already been tried by previous administrations. $4 billion over the course of 4 years, which was old Joe's term, has resulted in funding for those governments.
And many may not like what Trump has stated and other Republicans regarding the Ukraine funding, but there has been claims that the money the United States has been sending to Ukraine has been intercepted by Russians. It is reported that the Pentagon spent $62 billion in 2022 for weapons, ammunition, training, logistics, supplies, and salaries. While it has also been reported that some of this money has been seized by Russia. But wait a minute, within Ukraine, there are reports that its security service had discovered a mass corruption scheme in the purchase of weapons by the military, amounting to nearly $40 million. Ted Cruz was vocal about this and questioned if the United States should keep sending Ukraine money, if it's either being stolen by Russia or Ukraine itself is actually pocketing some of that money instead of using it for war against Russia. So it's basically the same concept with old Joe's administration, sending billions of dollars to Central America. It's problematic because obviously the governments are not fixing the so-called root causes of migration.
Good point. Sending money to foreign countries for aid is noble and an obligation for a global power such as the United States. But when the money you send is not resulting in the anticipated outcome, then you have to halt your funding and figure out what the, get this, root cause is. The $4 billion, which Harris is currently a part of the administration that sent that aid, only went into the pockets of fat cats, not citizens, which led to some of that money trickling down to drug cartels, who have a major stake in those economies by extortionary negotiations. And it hasn't had an impact whatsoever in regards to the border crisis. The root cause of migration from these specific regions is drug and human trafficking, with a moderate percentage of asylum seekers. The problem, though, as any normal person who has a functioning brain would know, is that those asylum seekers and dreamers also have been used as vessels to smuggle in drugs and human trafficking. And to be honest, just because you have a mother and child, it doesn't automatically mean they are asylum seekers or dreamers. They could very well be carrying out drug smuggling and human trafficking. But the main point here, Harris can't be tough on the border. She can't be tough on illegal immigration because of the message conflicting with her own damn party. If Harris vows to deport illegal immigrants, which does separate families, unfortunately, how can she then claim Trump wanted to separate families? See, if an illegal is caught but has children with them who were not born in this country, this makes them illegal as well. Now, is Harris even mentally capable of making such a decision about deporting illegal parent and children? Of course she isn't. She can barely answer basic questions. You know, that's enough for me. It's insane how I don't want this to seem like bashing, but Harris is not qualified for president. She wasn't qualified for vice president. She wasn't qualified for border czar. And even her prior political career was short-lived. The only qualification Harris has is she's a woman of color. And to operate the machinery of a president, well, the engine will start no matter who powers it. It doesn't automatically start because there's a woman of color in its presence. You have to bring something to the table, not just identity politics. Identity politics does not help the average citizen budget their checking and savings accounts because their jobs have reduced their hours. Identity politics does not prevent a lower-class family from being evicted because of those reduced hours, and they unfortunately couldn't pay the total balance of their rent. Identity politics does not lower gas prices, food prices, and the overall cost of living. Identity politics does not make communities safer. Identity politics does not keep criminals out of those communities. thanks to the Freedom Fund organization. Harris is a walking example of identity politics because you only think of her based on her identity, not her policies.
Yet, she's a political trap for Republicans based on identity politics. If you criticize her, you're attacking a woman of color, which aligns with the narrative that Republicans are racist and bigoted. If you don't criticize her or are very soft in how you do so, you allow her to gain undeserved momentum with voters who see her as some sort of inspiration, regardless of her blank policies. See, Democrats think they're slick, but as we say, you're not slick enough. You need more WD-40. It's the optics, combined with the funny business behind closed doors come election time, that could potentially give her the nod. But I want to go back to the Freedom Fund organization, who was responsible for evaluating the criminal charges of those individuals and then deciding to bail them out. Mind you, for those individuals to be bailed out of jail, someone or a group of individuals had to review their criminal charges. We examined it prior, but let's go back over this so you can truly grasp the sickness of this organization. Every single one of these individuals were previously arrested and charged, and some had already committed violent crimes. So the Freedom Fund's, quote, legal representatives reviewed their criminal history, reviewed their criminal charges at that time, and said, our client was rejected by a man. She has the right to stab him. We don't condone toxic masculinity. Oh, our client is a fine person, upstanding citizen. Sure, they attempted to rape a woman, sexually assaulted them, and also tried to kidnap women. Oh, they don't deserve to be locked away in prison. They deserve to be free to commit the same crimes later on. Oh, this fine gentleman doesn't deserve to be locked away in some jail cell for domestic abuse. That's not humane. Let's bail them out so they can go on to murder someone. Oh, a fine human being was charged with violently pummeling a bus rider. Well, we fight for the rights of our clients. They don't deserve to be locked behind bars for this. We will bail them out, and later they will be able to beat someone so horribly it left them with traumatic brain injuries. We believe in freedom and justice for all. Even more disturbing is the judge's ruling on those cases should actually be disbarred. It's their job to carry out justice in favor of morality and law. The judge has the constitutional authority to reject the release of those criminals, yet they allowed it. But that's the insanity the left wants. Is there any accountability for those judges after those criminals were released and then committed more crimes? Oh, of course not. They're obviously on the radical side of the equation. And the organization should also face criminal charges for literally fighting to release criminals, using taxpayers' money to do so, but then run away when those individuals make local news headlines for committing more crimes. Yeah, let's release all the criminals and then squirm away from being held accountable for the crimes they commit. Kamala Harris, a former district attorney, approved of this message. This is the chaos sector.